Thank you guys for jumping on. We've had some pretty exciting past couple of years together of figuring out how to run a sales academy. But then right when we were going to launch it this year, we had to suddenly do it remote, all on Zoom instead of doing it on site. So the real goal for our discussion today is I want the three perspectives of trainer, enablement, and actually the learner, the person who this was all designed for, to give a perspective on what went well and what to avoid. So as people think about running their own sales academies remotely, what are some things to look out for that will be really advantageous? So with that, I'd like to introduce you officially. So Kevin, I know you've been an enterprise AE, you've been at Asana for about 2 years. And one of my favorite things to learn about you is you got some training skills behind you as well, but from a hip hop perspective. So would love to learn a little bit about how you got into sales from that hip hop background. And I'm sure that will work its way into how do you apply learning, a different skill to different scenarios. And then Alyssa, coming over to you, you were one of the first at Asana as a salesperson. But now you're running enablement and you've been really instrumental about the planning and execution. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from your perspective about what expectation versus reality actually was. So we'll do this in kind of a conversational style. So if anybody watching live has questions, comments, concerns, insights, we're going to be checking that chat. But let's just kick it off with the actual reality, what actually happened. So Liz, let's just fast forward. This is our second year doing this. We had some great learnings from last year, but will you help set the context? What went into thinking about your Sales Academy development? And then how did you shift it, right, when we decided that everything needed to be remote?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So with regards to planning, I can start by giving a little bit of color to the overall objective and spirit of our Sales Academy, walk through some of the planning phases, and then what actually happened in reality. So yes, this was our second time planning and executing a Sales Academy with Winning by Design for our global sales org. The main goal and key objective being we could, one, ensure our reps were speaking the same language and really applying the same standard methodology across the board, and then two, do our very best to focus on the training of the core competencies each of our distinct teams would need to do their jobs. And of course, that ranges across each team, right? If we're looking at needs of young sales professionals versus skills that much more senior sales reps, enterprise reps would benefit from, that ranges across the board. So while our goal is to create these custom learning objectives, there's concepts like champion development, question-based selling, time management that are universally relevant for our reps. So similar to last year, we conducted our full assessment with the managers. We captured what are these new sales motions that we need to prioritize. We narrowed down our list. We compared our notes across our regional teams. We landed on our curriculum. And as we moved through assessment and scoping and design, we had to determine how to set these cohorts up. And I think what was really challenging for us going through this round a second time is we had a strong mix of folks who'd been through the curriculum already before, and those who were brand new to the team getting introduced to these concepts for the first time. So we had to strike that balance, consolidating teams, keeping engagement high, making it relevant for everybody. And ultimately, we landed on 6 distinct global cohorts, which launched sequentially over the span of 3 months across NAMER, APAC, and EMEA. Now, when reality hit us that we were going to
highlight a couple things that you're really great at that I think it's like it comes so natural to you, but it's such an important skill that you brought into the table is the assessment, scope, and design. That process is distinct. So the assess is like, what is the executive priorities that we're trying to solve with a training program like this? Scope, well, of course, like budget's going to be a concern. How personalized do we make it for each region, each person, versus what can we get done with the most value? And so you brought up, we had an APAC cohort, we had the NAMER teams, and that has its own concerns of doing really enterprise, customer success, SDRs, more high velocity. There's a lot of amazing sales professionals that we need to augment this to make it relevant. Because if we teach the same to everybody, people are going to be ostracized and not get the most out of it. And then the design element of it. How do we design it for onboarding the brand new people that haven't gone through this before versus ongoing? And I think that's a really great distinction that you've made and that you spent special detail to. One of the insights that I remember picking up that you did remarkably well was getting manager involvement during each step. What was your rationale behind that?
Yeah, I think buy-in and sponsorship is key, right? You can't go live, you can't invest all the time and planning and resources and budget unless you have the buy-in and investment of the managers. And I think it's a signal to the reps. If they see that their managers are involved, they're putting in the time, they're putting in the effort and energy, they're going to reflect that and mirror that as well. So I think that signal is super critical.
Yeah. Great. Kevin, I would love to hear from your perspective. So you're on the receiving end. Like right now, we've planned it all out. And we're like, hey, like this thing is coming. What was your perspective of what was happening before we launched, but when we were in this planning process? How did you learn about it, or what did you feel, either personally, or what did you sense on the team that this Sales Academy was coming?
Yeah, and Dan, this year was completely different, and we had to pivot quickly because we moved from all of our employees being in our office to COVID hitting, and now all the employees were remote. So knowing that Sales Academy was coming live, and we were all had anticipated being in the room together, having that camaraderie, being physically close to one another, and now going into this remote world, that was something that I think there was a lot of there was really a lot of questions from the sales reps, and how productive can this really be? Is this really worth our time right now with so much else happening within the world? And there was definitely some ambiguity coming into this to start.
I mean, to set the context, like the timing was remarkable. Like we had planned to do this March 15th, I think was our first kickoff date, or somewhere around mid-March. And then that's exactly when the shelter in place hit. And so there's a ton of things going on in people's mind. I think you captured it correctly. We all thought like we're on site, and there's a certain excitement, like people are flying in from New York for this. We're going to see some colleagues we don't get to see. It's like, it is training, but it's also time to network and get to know each other. And that all got erased very quickly. And not only was the change up of how it would be delivered, it's also your world, like who you're selling to, how your customers have changed. How do I balance my time working at home, family, dogs, spouse, significant others, like kids, like everything has changed. And so I think that was such an important step for us to acknowledge as we transition to doing it completely remote, is that this is different. So one of the biggest changes that list I know that you and I focused on was we can't do an 8-hour chunk anymore. This is no longer a full day thing. Because Kevin, can you imagine being like, oh, we're going to still do this? Like sit in front of your computer for 8 hours. Like it's just an awful experience. So what was your experience for how we actually started delivering it? So Kevin, I'll keep it on you for this first pass. What was that like once we did decide to pivot completely remote?
I was shocked, to be honest, Dan, at really how well you guys were able to organize us all together into one space. We're lucky that we have tools now that can keep us virtually connected, but there were certain tips that I saw you guys implemented too, by having different breakout rooms with the trainings, and time to chat with our different colleagues about the learnings that were going on and how we would implement that within our sales cycles. So as far as keeping it engaging and keeping us all connected while we weren't physically with one another, I was shocked at really how you were able to execute that and make it engaging.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the themes I really want to get out of today for everybody watching, it's what went well. And I think Breakouts is a super shout out. I think when we have big cohort, and big in our context is we tried to keep it like learning specific. So we had 50, 60 people in some cohorts. Breakout rooms were a complete difference maker. We could get 3 or 4 people to work through a scenario, which had a whole bunch of benefits that I didn't even expect. For example, when you're in front of 50 people, it's probably easier than being in a course, actually, in its own live training session, to speak up, because it's still just a computer screen and someone else like, oh, I could jump in. But I did find a key difference for people who never spoke up in the big group that were super engaged in the breakout. So it does tap into how people learn and also how people can connect in this different environment. So thank you for that shout out. I think that was a really cool thing. And we'll go into some examples, like tactical ways that people watching this can start implementing. Over to you, Liz. What else did you pick out? Let's first start with the good. What went really well with our transition from on-site to remote?
Yeah, and it's just reflecting on that, Dan, I think we had about 4 hours, or I want to say 4 days to react, right, and execute and convert almost 100 hours of the live training we had originally programmed into virtual. So it's really fun how to think back how scrappy and nimble that we became. But yeah, some of the things that went really well, I think establishing the rules of the engagement up front helped set us up for success. Everything from how we expected our reps and managers to show up to the trainings, how to ask questions, how to contribute to the conversation, where to go for technical issues, where to find additional resources. These were all new added elements that we hadn't really had to address in a live format. We also had numerous conversations with our managers to ensure they had as much of a role to play in the success of Academy as you and Boris, our Winning by Design trainers. And similar to Kevin's point, I think the feedback we received across the managers and reps was really positive around the virtual modality. And I think some even told us and expressed that, hey, I think this provides this added level of intimacy and this added level of interaction within the conversation. And so I think using the Zoom breakout sessions, like you mentioned, helped really simulate that. And I was happy to see this was such a seamless, elegant transition.
Yes, I totally agree. I love that reflection on it, because it was thoughtful. Like, we did that on purpose. And I think using the tools at our disposal were incredible. I think what we avoided, like, we kind of knew would have been awful, like if this was just a slide deck, or worse, like if I was presenting a PowerPoint and it was just like slide after slide after slide. That's not the best way for people to learn, I think, in general, but especially remotely. That's what a lot of people expect. And it's easy to do PowerPoint slides and create something and structure the combo, but that's not the real purpose of a sales academy or training in general. It's, what do you do with that skill? And so I think the key thing that we tried to structure is over an hour, setting up with the why. What does this mean to you? And then reflecting on what have we learned and where does this fit in onto previous learnings, how to apply it, work together, give feedback, and then set up next step. And so that was our formula for running every segment of this. And then it came down to like the design, like how long should we expect people to sit? And so let's talk about the things that we tried that didn't actually end up working so well, which was the length of the sessions. Maybe I'll like plant the context there. Historically, when I run a 4-week course, 8 hours of live training done through remote, it's 2 hours at a time. Thought process. It'll help people reflect. It'll give us enough time to go deep into a concept, practice it, and then move on. If it's only an hour, it's like crunch time. We actually don't have a lot of time to go to any real depth on a topic. But in this case, we crammed a lot, about 16 hours, and it felt like 2-hour blocks, twice a week. A couple, like the first week when we did a kickoff, there was a lot of training there, but we made an adjustment. We went from 2 hours down to 90 minutes. Kevin, what was your experience going through that transition?
Yeah, I think chopping it down from 2 hours to 90 minutes helped. When you're staring at a computer screen for that long, no matter how engaging it is, you need breaks. You need to break it down. And the first couple of times, I think Dan, Alyssa, and the rest of the leaders that were spearheading this noticed like there was fatigue amongst the reps. We started getting less and less sharp, and because our laptops were open too, I am guilty of this. You would get pings from your email, Slack, and constantly get noises coming elsewhere to distract you from what was going on. So just a simple shift like that 30-minute, lessening it by 30 minutes, but also providing frequent breaks to walk around, to use the restroom, to get a snack. That helped keep engagement high.
Yeah. So I have a chat here, Kevin, and it's directed towards you. Bradford was asking what tools were most useful during this. And it was funny, like during your description on distractions, I heard the notification come up. And I think this is real. This happens all the time. When we're doing on video, distractions are normal. How do we approach those, or how do we minimize those, are key. And so what are some of the tools that helped you minimize those distractions or get the most out of the interactions through this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's funny because a lot of these tools that will typically keep us connected, like Slack, email, or whatever other productivity tools your company is using, are normally a good thing. It normally keeps us accountable. It keeps our teams connected, right? But in this case, we're getting noise when really our entire focus should be, for us, it was within the Zoom platform. So I wouldn't say any tools particularly helped in this sense. It's more so closing out your other productivity tools to make sure that your attention is laser focused on the trainings that are at hand.
Yeah, I do feel like that's a trade-off. If we talked about that before, do we create a Slack channel specific to what's going on in Academy? And then we decided, oh, actually, the momentum from going Zoom to Slack, well, now you're in Slack, and now all of a sudden these other notifications distract you. So we ended up using the chat in Zoom as the primary way of asking questions. But if there's a big group, we had a moderator. And so I think that was a really helpful shout out. And then the notifications, at least I know on Mac, like to turn it off, like top right, click on the 3 bars, scroll down a little bit, which is annoying, and then turn off the notifications for the full day. I think that is a really effective strategy for everybody to use. But there's one major thing that we set expectation from, and you guys did amazingly from the get-go, which was video. Everybody who shows up to this is on camera. And there's a psychological element to it. It's the same distance, everybody, nose to nose with the facilitator, with each other when you're asking questions. But being able to toggle between active speaker versus grid view. This can also be really helpful because I know even for some of people who are watching this video, I'm on grid view right now versus going into active mode. And now you can see on the board a little bit easier. But sometimes it's nice to be able to see who else is there. How are they reacting to it? And I think that's a really important dynamic, especially as we go to remote, that people are like, oh, I can do things on the side. We all know what's happening when you're off camera. You're doing emails, you're taking care of the kids, like your dog is barking. We get it, that's normal. I think we should embrace that. Allow that to happen. If you have to momentarily go off camera, no problem. But the expectation was that if you show up here, you're focused as much as you can. And then, of course, the exceptions are allowed. So I think those are like really effective tools that I found. The one that I'm excited to talk more about, which is the breakouts, is how we used Google Sheets. But before we get into that, Alyssa, anything else, any other tools or setup advice that you would give for anyone running this session remote?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zoom made it possible for us for this to just feel so seamless and just so interactive, and the way that we were still able to ask questions, to interact one-on-one with each other. The breakout rooms, we got raving feedback around that. So I know you want to go deeper into that, how we were able to execute certain exercises. It also gave a lot of our newest reps a chance to bond and get to know their teammates. If you can imagine, we had a lot of new hires who started just before we all went to remote. And this gave them a chance to get into these small breakout rooms, have one-on-one intimate conversations, and start building those relationships. So I also think that that was a really big plus for us during this experience.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Everybody's going to be dealing with that. If you're hiring right now, like onboarding remote is a huge concern. So I think having these breakouts and building it in, powerful. The other one, oh, there's 2 more that I want to like really shout out, and they're related, but they also have the issue of chat versus Slack. Zoom has an awesome tool called polls. And what I love using about polls are like a pop quiz. Like if I just taught something, or if I wanted to test for engagement, or even like get a vote on something, using the polling feature in Zoom is really powerful. It's anonymous, so people can just give you a sense of what they learned, how ready they are. But there's a limitation. It's not as engaging. There's no color, there's no video associated. So one of the fun things that we did was starting to roll in Kahoots. And Kahoots is just a process shift. It gets people to pull out their phone, go to a website, and do a very similar like Jeopardy/poll engagement, but every question has a leaderboard. And so that created like a mini fun game, but also had some learning attributes associated to it. But let's go into the breakouts. I feel like this is going to be the most important thing, and I'll follow up in the chat for everybody with a LinkedIn post and a template to use. But Kevin, describe the experience that you had during the breakouts, or advice you'd have for other people on how to set this up. Great.
Well, one thing that I liked about the breakouts was they always came after we learned a lesson, and now it's time to apply. So we would break out into our different groups, and we would have some kind of prompt that was instructed by Dan or Alyssa on, okay, now put this into application. How would this happen? Or how would you execute this with a customer? Let's, one person would be assigned to writing things down within the Google Sheets. The other two would typically role play, and then we would all come back together and share what each group did. So that way there was participation, not just from one person, but there were roles assigned to each person within the breakout group. So everyone had a say and everyone could collaborate together. That's something that I really admired.
Yeah, a subtle test that I've been doing on that is how many people should be in a breakout room. And so quick tip, if you only put 2 people in a breakout room, then one person not showing up because they're taking care of their baby or dog or whatever, I'll leave someone hanging. So I always try to do at least 3, but usually between 3 and 4, and then rotate just like you said. If we're doing a role play, one person's coach, one person's the customer, and one person's the rep or CSM who's practicing that scenario. So that's a really great tip. Thank you. Lisa, what about you? I know you were helpful in, or you helped really build out some of the key learnings behind those breakouts. So as we tested better flows of doing it, what did you find was the right balance of amount of information to give versus letting people work through it as a team?
Yeah, I find one of the concepts that you reinforce a lot comes to light during these exercises, which is one of the best ways to test your level of knowledge is that level of self-awareness, self-diagnosis, kind of falling upon the truth, self-discovery. So I think when we would be introduced to a lot of these new concepts, we would do a little bit of role play, a lot of interaction, we'd move into these exercises, and then it was on the reps to really figure out. And you might be paired with a group of varied level of experiences. And I think that also kept it really dynamic. So naturally, we had some leaders that would step up and facilitate and guide the group. And sometimes you'd be really pleasantly surprised that some of even the younger sales professionals or newer sales reps were the ones to really be brave and courageous and just go for it and use their own customer examples.
Yeah, that was my favorite part, is just seeing people step up and seeing who stepped up and like challenging some people in front of others, but giving them enough, I guess, permission to fail and learn from each other just helped everybody feel like this was real. I think the mistake that I used to make all the time was just like, the value that I give is me talking at you and telling you what you should do. But instead, it's learning from each other. How do other people do it? Or even when we go into things like storytelling, it's like, well, the framework is pretty straightforward, but actually getting the words out in the right way, that takes practice. That takes, feedback from people. So I do feel like that went well. But speaking of things going well, let's talk about things that did not go well. What are some things that were surprisingly like shocking? Like, oh, definitely don't do that next time. One of them for me that stands out immediately that's really challenging is I had to hold my baby a couple times because my wife is in healthcare and not there. And there was one like really funny moment, but luckily it was during a breakout. But he had an upset stomach and he threw up on me like while we were going through this, and I was like, oh no. And so that was a really interesting moment on how to handle it. And so what I felt that I did from that moment going forward, like recognizing like, ooh, that's a bad situation, is always having a backup plan. So if I needed somebody to jump in, someone was co-hosting, it was there, my internet fails or something's there, it's not leaving people hanging. So I think that's a really important step. Like I accidentally let people hang sometimes. And so now who's the co-host? If this scenario happens, if you notice my internet cuts out, what's the expectation for you to step in? Like, don't just be like, oh, well, let's just wait a couple minutes for Dan to figure it out. No, it's like immediately momentum, keep things going. What about you guys? What else did you feel like missed the mark a little bit or that we would need to change for next time?
Yeah, I'm happy
You
to
can go
start.
first.
I'm happy to start and speak on the rep perspective. So personally, I could have done a better job with closing out different applications and for minimizing that noise that we talked about earlier. It's really easy to get distracted when you're online. There are so many different tools and so many different places that you're getting noise from. So oftentimes Dan would be instructing, or we'd have a group hangout session to implement the new learnings, and I'd get an important customer email, or I'd get Slack from a different channel regarding some deal that's happening. And, my attention was split and it's hard to stay focused when doing so. So one thing that I would recommend, it could be as simple as every time that we start a session, you come and you set the expectations. Hey, everyone, right now we're taking 3 minutes, close out your email, close out Slack, close out your other productivity tools, because right now we are just staying on the Zoom application and whatever other tools we'll be using to practice virtually together.
Yeah, I certainly have a bit of a long list of things I'd like to try next time, or things that of course we can improve. I think one of the things is, leveraging the line managers a little bit more early on, doing these midpoint check-ins across the reps to confirm, is this matching expectations? Do the reps agree this is applicable and relevant to their roles? Should we make any pivots sooner than later? How can we better enhance the experience? So I think that's one thing that I would want to implement more next time. I think we talked about this, Dan, frequency and scheduling. It's one of those things, it's so hard to get perfect. We had some folks, throughout the feedback that had wished for higher frequency and shorter sessions, and then a lot who asked for the complete opposite. So, I think we settled on the 90 minutes purposely and intentionally so that we could, teach, support, ask them to apply, make it really stick. And one of the last things is just be open to shifting gears and pivoting. I think as our reality escalated, it became a lot harder to keep the excitement and energy and focus while the intensity of our reality increased. Just being open to switching gears, switching up the curriculum if it no longer reflects the most urgent and pressing needs of the team. So really striking that balance. So those are some of the big key takeaways for me.
That's a great point. The manager involvement, like this is the only way that training or any behavior change sticks. Because if you don't do it and it's like a checkbox type training, like, oh, we all got trained, like now go do it. It doesn't happen. Behavior change is super tough. So I think being very specific about what are you going to be able to do now that you've learned this. And then the missing piece for me, what you guys are both bringing up that I think would have solved it, not completely, but actually highlighting when people do it really well. So Kevin, for example, last year when we first went through this, we did a session on demo and you were like, whoa, let me try it. And you had a call immediately after. You went on video, you presented what your feature was, you asked the 3 questions. Is what I showed you relevant? What impact does that have? Can you see yourself or your team using it? And then you reported back. And so I feel like that is one of the things that is so critical and easy to miss over. It's like, oh, we got short amount of time, so I have to speak faster, I have to do more content. No, we need to spend more time making it applicable, highlighting success stories like you, applying something, what worked and what didn't, but that's the real talk. And I do agree that even though we were able to pivot very quickly from doing on-site to remote in 4 days and scheduling, I missed the mark on being able to make this applicable. It's not that the content completely changed, it's the application or the context of it. It's like the conversations I'm having are different. So yes, remote selling, yes, setting up a meeting like this, asking, those are still relevant. But what changes now? What kinds of questions can have more impact, or what kinds of questions should I avoid? And I think that was something that we were all just trying to figure out at the time. And I think is really important now that we know and can reflect. I love giving that insight to others who are starting to build out their sales academies. Make sure that everything that you teach, even more than before, is as applicable to the reps who are actually going to be implementing it right now. Give them the job, the steps, the checklist to apply it to their job right away. So that was a really nice insight that came out of the debrief. So yeah, anything else that comes up with your mind? Any other useful tips that you'd give to the community?
I would say, just as you talked about, setting the stage is so important. What made this especially impactful was that we had buy-in from all of our managers on the importance of this, why we need to attend, what we're going to be covering, and how it's directly going to impact each one of us. So setting the context early and often is, I think, an important piece in making training a success.
That's a great point. Yeah, don't just assume you've said it once and it's going to stick. It's really like what you said. It's like spend 3 minutes every single session. Like, hey, reminding everybody, you can do it in a positive way, not a punishment way, but it's like, hey, to maximize all of our time, to keep learning from all of us, an important step is spend 3 minutes, finish up that last email, that last Slack message, and close it for the next 90 minutes. I think that those type of tactical reminders, that's a really great statement. Thank you. Alyssa, what about you? Any other useful tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that was a good reinforcement learning for us was the fundamentals are so critical to refresh. It's so important, even for more tenured reps, to be reintroduced to those fundamentals. Um, and I would just say for anyone out there who's also looking to plan an academy or going through the programming, especially now in today's climate, the best thing you can do is similar to a wedding, stay agile, stay nimble, be flexible. Nothing is going to go perfectly according to plan. So know that going in and hope for the best and work with the best possible partners that you can to execute.
That's exactly right. I love it. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. It was great to have a conversation. Like, I tried to keep it as realistic as possible. Like, what did we actually learn? And I felt like we got there today. We talked about the great things that happen. Some of them we did by accident, some of them were designed, and some things that we would change for next time. And I think we're going to continue learning from everybody. We would love to hear from you, everybody who's watching. Please let us know, what are some tips that you have found or any other questions that you have? We'll keep this conversation going on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Thanks for joining. Any last comments from you guys, Kevin or Alyssa?
I would just say thanks for watching. If anyone is interested in having a conversation around everything and anything that touches sales enablement land, happy to discuss. So please feel free to reach out to me.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you for the time, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.